Fear does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Ethan learned this the hard way. From the outside, his life looked normal, maybe even comfortable. He had a steady job, familiar routines, and people who smiled at him every day. But inside, something invisible controlled his choices. He avoided risks. He delayed dreams. He stayed silent when his heart wanted to speak. Every decision passed through the same question. What if something goes wrong? So he stayed where he was, not because he was weak, but because he was afraid. One evening, after another long day of choosing safety over truth, Ethan stood by his window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. A strange thought crossed his mind, simple yet unsettling. What kind of life am I living if fear decides everything for me? That night, for the first time, he didn't try to silence the fear. He listened to it. And in that moment, something changed. Not around him, but within him. Because the journey to living without fear does not begin with courage. It begins with awareness. The next morning, fear was still there. Ethan noticed it the moment he woke up. Tight in his chest, familiar, almost comforting in a strange way. For years, fear had been his silent advisor. It told him when to stop, when to retreat, when to lower his expectations. But today, something felt different. As he prepared for work, the question from the night before echoed in his mind. What kind of life am I living if fear decides everything for me? He tried to ignore it. He turned on the radio, he checked his phone, he rushed through his routine. Yet the question followed him, on the bus, in the office, even during conversations he barely listened to. For the first time, Ethan realized something uncomfortable. Fear had shaped his life without ever asking for permission. It had chosen his silence over his voice, his comfort over his growth, his safety over his potential. At lunch, while others laughed and talked about plans and dreams, Ethan sat quietly. He imagined a version of himself who said yes more often. A version who tried, failed, learned, and tried again. That version felt distant, but real. And then another thought emerged, softer than fear, but stronger. What if fear is not the enemy, but the signal? A signal pointing to everything that mattered. Ethan didn't feel brave. He didn't feel ready. But for the first time, he felt curious. And curiosity, he would soon learn, is the first crack in the wall fear builds around the mind. Fear expected obedience. It had always received it. That afternoon, Ethan noticed how carefully he moved through the world, how he avoided eye contact, how he softened his opinions, how he stayed quiet in meetings even when he had something meaningful to say. Fear didn't force him, it simply suggested, and Ethan usually agreed. But that day, something subtle shifted. During a team discussion, an idea formed in his mind, clear, practical, useful. As usual, fear rose instantly. Someone will judge you. What if it's not good enough? Stay quiet. It's safer. His heart beat faster. His throat tightened. Then he remembered the question. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to interrupt the pattern. Ethan raised his hand. The room went silent for a second that felt much longer. His voice trembled as he spoke, but he spoke anyway. He shared the idea, imperfectly, honestly. No one laughed, no one attacked him. Instead, someone nodded. Another person added to his thought. The conversation moved forward. The fear didn't disappear, but it weakened. Ethan felt something unfamiliar wash over him. Not confidence, not pride, relief. He realized something important in that moment. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was action in its presence. That evening, walking home, the city felt different, brighter, wider, as if the world had expanded just a little because he had. Fear was still with him, but now it was no longer in charge. And that small act of defiance, so quiet, so ordinary, marked the beginning of a new rule in Ethan's life. Fear could speak, but it would no longer decide. That night, courage didn't feel heroic. Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. His mind searched desperately for mistakes, words he should have chosen differently, reactions he might have misread. Fear returned, heavier than before. You got lucky. Next time won't be the same. Don't push it. Ethan realized something painful. Fear doesn't surrender after one loss. It comes back stronger, using memories as chains. He remembered past moments, times he stayed silent, times he walked away, times he told himself later until later never came. Each memory whispered the same message: this is who you are. For years, Ethan had believed fear was protecting him from pain, but now he saw the truth. It had been protecting him from growth. The weight he felt wasn't from today's action, it was from years of avoidance. And yet, beneath that weight, something else existed: choice. He understood that fear had history, but it didn't have authority unless he gave it permission. The past could explain him, but it didn't have to define him. Ethan sat up, took a slow breath, and made a quiet promise. Not to be fearless, not to be perfect, just this: tomorrow, I will take one step I usually avoid. No audience, no applause, just a step. As he closed his eyes, fear was still there, but for the first time, it felt tired. Because fear grows powerful when we obey it, and weak when we outgrow it. Morning arrived without ceremony. Fear didn't disappear overnight. It was there when Ethan brushed his teeth, when he tied his shoes, when he checked his phone. But something had changed. Fear no longer felt like a command. It felt like background noise. Ethan remembered his promise: one step. Not a big decision, not a life-changing leap, just one step he normally avoided. On his way to work, he passed the small cafe he had visited countless times. He always ordered the same drink, avoided conversation, paid quickly, and left. Safety and repetition. Today, he hesitated. Fear spoke immediately. Why change this? Ethan stepped forward anyway. He looked the barista in the eyes and spoke, calmly, clearly. He asked a simple question. He smiled. It lasted only seconds, yet it felt strangely significant. Nothing dramatic happened. The world didn't shift, but he did. That tiny action sent a quiet message to his mind: I can act even when I'm uncomfortable. Throughout the day, Ethan noticed something remarkable. Each small step made the next one feel lighter. Fear still showed up, but it arrived later, weaker, less convincing. He understood then that confidence is not built through thinking, it is built through movement. One step teaches the mind what words never can: I survived. By evening, Ethan felt tired but not drained. For the first time in a long while, his energy wasn't consumed by avoidance. As he walked home, a simple truth settled in. Living without fear doesn't mean eliminating it, it means shrinking it, one step at a time. And tomorrow, he would take another. Fear noticed the change. It always does. By the next day, it returned with sharper edges, louder thoughts, and heavier doubts. It reminded Ethan of risks, of embarrassment, of failure. It replayed old mistakes like warnings carved in stone. You're pushing too far. This isn't who you are. Go back to what's safe. Ethan felt the familiar tension return, stronger than before, and for a moment he wondered if fear was right. That was when he understood something crucial. Fear grows loudest right before it loses control. At work, Ethan was offered a small responsibility he would normally decline. His first instinct was to step back. Fear rushed in, confident, persuasive. But instead of arguing with it, Ethan did something new. He acknowledged it. "I hear you," he thought, "but I'm choosing differently." His voice didn't shake when he said yes, but his hands did, and that was enough. The day wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He felt uncertain, but nothing broke. No disaster followed. That evening, Ethan realized a powerful truth. Fear had been lying about the cost of action. The real cost wasn't failure. It was a life paused, delayed, and half-lived. Fear didn't vanish that night, but it changed shape. It stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a test. And Ethan was finally willing to take it. Ethan began to notice something subtle but powerful. There was a small space, almost invisible, between feeling fear and responding to it. For most of his life, that space had not existed. Fear appeared and action stopped. Now the space was growing. In that pause, Ethan learned to breathe, to observe, to choose. One afternoon, a conversation unfolded that would once have silenced him. A disagreement, different opinions, eyes turning toward him, waiting. Fear arrived instantly. But instead of retreating, Ethan stayed in the space. He didn't rush. He didn't apologize for existing. He spoke slowly, honestly, without trying to impress or defend himself. The room listened, and something remarkable happened, not because of what he said, but because he said it without fear ruling him. Ethan realized then that fear lives in anticipation, not reality. Most of its power comes from stories the mind tells before anything actually happens. Action, however imperfect, interrupts those stories. Later that evening, Ethan reflected on the day. He hadn't become fearless. He still felt doubt, still felt tension, but fear no longer dictated his identity. It had become a moment, not a sentence. And in that growing space between thought and action, Ethan discovered freedom. Because freedom doesn't begin when fear ends. It begins when choice appears. For a long time, Ethan believed strength meant control. Control over emotions, control over outcomes, control over how others perceived him. But fear had thrived under that definition. As Ethan grew more aware, he saw the truth. Control was an illusion. No matter how carefully he planned, life remained unpredictable, and trying to control everything only fed anxiety. Strength, he realized, was something else entirely. One evening, Ethan received unexpected criticism. In the past, it would have crushed him, kept him awake, replaying every word. Fear immediately offered its familiar script, "You're not good enough." This time, Ethan paused. He let the discomfort exist without fighting it. He listened to the criticism without collapsing into it. Some of it was useful, some of it wasn't, and for the first time, he didn't take it personally. That moment taught him a quiet lesson. Strength is the ability to stay open, especially when it's uncomfortable. Fear loses power when you stop resisting it and stop obeying it. As days passed, Ethan noticed a deeper calm settling in. Not excitement, not adrenaline, stability. He understood that living without fear wasn't about becoming bold in every moment. It was about trusting himself to handle whatever came next. And that trust, earned slowly, step by step, was something fear could never take away. Fear often hides behind one powerful instinct: stay invisible. Ethan had spent years mastering that skill, blending in, staying agreeable, avoiding attention. It felt safe, it felt controlled, but it also felt empty. One afternoon, an opportunity arose, nothing dramatic but meaningful. A chance to share his perspective with a wider group. His name would be attached to his ideas. There would be visibility. Fear reacted instantly. If you're seen, you can be judged. If you're judged, you can be hurt. Ethan felt the old pull to retreat, but he also felt something new, a quiet refusal. He asked himself a different question now. What do I lose by hiding? The answer was clear. He accepted the opportunity. The days leading up to it were uncomfortable. Fear whispered constantly. Doubt questioned every thought. But Ethan didn't cancel. He didn't escape. When the moment came, he stood there, nervous, present, human. And he spoke, not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. The response surprised him. Not praise, but connection. People didn't see a flawless version of him. They saw a real one. And that was enough. Ethan learned something profound. Fear says, if they see you, you'll be rejected. Reality often says, if they see you, you'll be understood. By choosing to be seen, Ethan didn't lose safety. He gained freedom. Something shifted after that moment. Fear still appeared, but its voice had changed. It no longer sounded like a command. It sounded like an opinion, one Ethan could consider or ignore. He noticed how fear once acted like a gatekeeper, deciding what was possible. Now it stood beside, watching as he moved forward anyway. Ethan began doing things he once postponed endlessly. Small conversations, honest boundaries, quiet decisions that honored his values instead of his comfort. None of it felt dramatic, but all of it felt true. One morning, as he walked through the city, Ethan realized he was no longer rehearsing conversations in his head, no longer bracing for imaginary disasters. His mind felt lighter. That was when it became clear. Fear had lost its authority the moment Ethan stopped asking for its permission. Fear didn't need to disappear for life to change. It only needed to be demoted. Ethan smiled to himself, not because everything was perfect, but because he trusted his ability to face imperfection. Living without fear wasn't about a fearless future. It was about a present lived fully. And for the first time, Ethan felt truly awake. Ethan expected courage to feel loud. He imagined confidence would arrive with excitement, with certainty, with a rush of power. But what came instead was calm, steady, quiet, almost unremarkable. And that surprised him. The more he acted without fear controlling him, the less emotional resistance he felt. Situations that once triggered panic now triggered thought. He responded instead of reacting. Fear still knocked, but it no longer barged in. One evening, faced with a difficult decision, Ethan noticed something new. He wasn't rushing to escape discomfort. He was willing to sit with uncertainty, to let the answer unfold instead of forcing it. That patience felt like strength. He understood then that fear thrives on urgency. It pressures the mind to choose safety quickly. Calm slows everything down, and in that slowness, fear weakens. Ethan's life hadn't become easier, but it had become clearer. And clarity brought peace. Living without fear wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet confidence built from trust. Trust in himself. Trust in his ability to adapt. And that trust made fear unnecessary. Ethan no longer tried to defeat fear. That battle had exhausted him for years. Now he approached fear differently, not as an enemy, but as a signal. When fear appeared, he asked one simple question: what is this pointing to? Sometimes it pointed to growth, sometimes to honesty, sometimes to a boundary that needed to be set. Fear was no longer something to run from. It had become information. When Ethan stopped fighting fear, it lost its grip. Without resistance or obedience, fear had nowhere to anchor itself. He noticed how quickly it passed when he didn't feed it with stories. When he focused on the present moment, what he could do now, fear faded into the background. Ethan realized that living without fear didn't mean erasing it from life. It meant changing the relationship. Fear had gone from ruler to messenger, and messengers don't make decisions. That responsibility belonged to him. With each day, Ethan felt more aligned with himself, more grounded, more free. Because the goal was never fearlessness. The goal was self-trust. To be continued in Part 13. Part 13. Living from Within. Something subtle but profound had taken root in Ethan's life. He was no longer living in reaction to the world around him. He was living from within. Decisions no longer began with, "What will they think?" They began with, "What feels right?" This didn't make life easier, but it made it honest. Ethan noticed how fear once pulled him outward, forcing him to scan faces, opinions, and outcomes for approval. Now his attention returned inward to his values, his intentions, his limits. When fear appeared, it didn't shake him as before. It simply highlighted moments where courage was required. Not loud courage, but quiet alignment. He learned to say no without guilt, to say yes without overthinking, to walk away without explaining everything. And in doing so, Ethan felt whole. Fear used to fragment him, pulling him in different directions. Now, even when fear showed up, it no longer divided him. Because when you live from within, fear loses its power to define you. It can visit, but it cannot rule. Ethan understood then that a fearless life isn't built by changing the world, but by coming home to yourself. Ethan no longer chased a perfect version of himself. For years, fear had convinced him that he needed to be better before he could be brave, more confident, more skilled, more certain. But now he saw the lie clearly. Courage didn't wait for readiness. It moved with acceptance. Ethan accepted his doubts, his limits, his humanity. And strangely, that acceptance made him lighter. When mistakes happened, he didn't collapse into shame. When uncertainty appeared, he didn't panic. He allowed life to be imperfect and allowed himself to be the same. Fear had always fed on resistance. Acceptance starved it. Ethan understood something deeply freeing. You don't overcome fear by proving your worth. You overcome it by knowing your worth doesn't need proof. With that realization, fear no longer felt like a threat. It felt like weather, sometimes present, sometimes gone, never personal. And as Ethan looked ahead, he didn't see a fearless future. He saw a free one. Fear never truly leaves, and that is not a failure. It is part of being human. Ethan understood this now. He didn't live without fear because fear had vanished. He lived without fear because it no longer controlled his life. Fear still appeared at the edge of new moments, but it no longer stood in the center. What stood there now was choice. Ethan chose honesty over comfort, action over delay, trust over control. And in doing so, he discovered the greatest truth of all. A fearless life is not built in one bold moment. It is built in thousands of small decisions to move forward anyway. If you are reading this, know this. You do not need to wait until fear disappears. You do not need perfect confidence. You do not need permission. Start where you are. Take one step you usually avoid. Let fear speak, but don't let it decide. Because the moment you choose action over avoidance, fear loses its power and your life begins. The choice is yours.